And we're live. This is Virtually Connecting and ePatients, talking about the Yoga MOOC running on edX. I'm Joe Murphy in Gambier, Ohio, and I'm here with...
Hi, I'm Autumn Keynes, and I'm coming to you from De Pere, Wisconsin.
I was looking at that and wondering if it was De Pere or De Pere.
De Pere.
De Pere.
De Pere. Yeah, I know. Everybody thinks it's a little weird.
So, well, Ohio's got its own Versailles and Lima. Yeah, Versailles and Lima, and I think there's a third one.
There's also Lancaster and Lancaster.
Oh.
When I was in Columbus, like everybody used to always, because I'd say Lancaster, they'd say it's not Lancaster, it's Lancaster.
Oh. I haven't noticed that one. So how are you finding, how's your experience with Yoga MOOC so far?
I continue to struggle with the dedication piece of it.
Me too.
Yeah, it's still a MOOC, right? And it's still yoga. It's still, but here's the thing that I was thinking about the other day. I think I'm doing more meditation and more yoga now that Yoga MOOC is going on than I was doing before it started.
Okay.
Just because there's so many people in my network that are talking about yoga and talking about mindfulness. It's in my mind more often, right? I'm thinking about it more often, and I'm doing it more than I was doing it before the MOOC started. So I think that that's a good thing. I've also been dealing with some issues that have prevented me from doing some physical stuff. So I fell.
Oh.
Yeah, I was wearing these boots that I don't usually wear, and they've got a funky little heel on them, and I just kind of lost my footing, and boom, straight down. I like bruised my hand, scraped up my knee, and so I've been having a hard time trying to do any kind of physical poses or anything like that. But yeah, I feel like I'm doing more than I was doing without it, but I'm not able to be as dedicated as I think, I want to be, I guess. What about you?
Very, very similar story. And I appreciate the fact that one of the things you highlight is I have started using the meditation app on my phone occasionally, and it's mostly I am practicing some more mindfulness at work, with just kind of I am now going to take 3 to 5 short breaths kind of thing, so yeah, that part is actually in my consciousness and is happening more, which is good. But in a way, my reaction was very much, I should probably get on edX and look for one of the guided meditations there and do that. No, I'm going to use the one on my phone. And actually, I think that's a good choice, right? Because of the choice that made it actually happen. Because it would have been really easy to say, I got to get on edX and find the right week and find the right thing. Or I can watch the next thing on TV.
Right.
So that's a good thing. Yeah, similarly, I went to the gym and did non-yoga working out. But again, I think I did it because I'm in a network of people that are talking about that, and I'm reading more about exercise. And no, you got to actually go to the gym. And then I said, well, it's been a long time since I did that, and everything hurts. And my capacity for stretching may be a little low.
Yeah. Well, and also, so I probably am doing like what you're not supposed to do with any type of learning, right? Where like, when we decided to have this conversation, it all of a sudden held me accountable. It was like, oh, I got to go watch some videos. So I'm really only at like week 2 right now. And week 2 is chock full of all these videos where George Siemens starts to come in, right? And starts talking with Catherine Span about not just yoga, but about our digital world and how our digital world is pulling our attention with notifications and with companies that are creating platforms that really are, their whole point is to make them more and more addictive so that you spend more time on them so that you have more chance of being exposed to advertising because that's what they're really selling. Right. So all of this is kind of crashing into my brain right now, right? That like we're in this community that is very ruled by technology, both of us, right?
Right.
I think I could say this for myself, and tell me if I'm misspeaking by saying this about you, that it's a part of our jobs, but it's also a part of our lives.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we kind of love this stuff. We're kind of doing it.
Yes, that's fair.
You know, like yeah, it's not just a job for a lot of us that are doing this kind of work.
Yeah. Well, although I will say, it's something that I love that's not always healthy for me.
Right.
Right. That
Right.
I don't. I'm not going to let myself hide under the. Well, I have to check Twitter.
Right.
Because people at my job are going to ask me questions about Twitter. Because actually, those things don't line up one to one.
They don't.
Right? I know enough about Twitter that I could sign off for a week and still do a Twitter workshop and talk to people about here's what you can get out of it or not.
Sure.
So I'm not going to give myself a pass, but yes, I think you speak accurately that there's a component of that relationship that's with technology that's not unconsidered, which is something that Rebecca and I talked about last week, and we didn't care much for some of the assumptions about who the audience was in that stuff about digital distraction.
Yeah, and so, but
that may have
I'm
been
wondering.
While you were on the call.
What's that? I
that
don't
may
know
have
if
been
that's
while
when
you
I was
were
on
on the call.
Might have been.
Last week.
I don't know if I remember us talking about that last week. But the thing that occurs to me is that, you know, like how can we maybe talk about mindfulness and talk about yoga when Yoga Mook isn't going on, right?
Yeah.
Like if this is something that we're doing these, we're in this technological world and we live it more so than maybe other people do, because it's part of our job, but it's also a big part of our community. It's a big part of our networks. It's a big part of how we find affinity with other people. But how can we also do that in a healthy way? And if yoga is one of the ways that we can do that, how could we bring that into the conversation more frequently?
That's a great question. I love that. Because you're right. Because I would absolutely be a Yoga Mook dropout if not for you and Maha, who has not even made it to one of these sessions yet, and Rebecca. You know, I would have said, well, that was fun. I registered and I'm off schedule like you. I did the reading for week 3, but but I did it an hour ago. So you're right. I mean, there's an interesting opportunity there. It's not really an answer to the question, but here's where my mind went. I have tried a couple of times to integrate mindfulness into meetings that weren't on that topic. Just a couple of moments of saying, you know, at something at work, I appreciate that everybody rushed over here. You finished your last class. You know what your meeting after this is. I know you're all very busy and I appreciate your time. Can we have 30 seconds of silence? Just to center ourselves for the conversation.
Wow.
What would happen if we did that before a V-connecting session?
Right.
You know, could we sit in silence together for 30 seconds?
Right. I like that. It's really interesting.
And yeah, I did it at an ELI workshop, and actually there it went over really well. And no one's the first liberal arts college's workshop. I got the wrap up portion, and I said, "Y'all look really stressed. It's been a long week. We've worked really hard.
Right.
Let's take a minute and just chill for a second before we try to wrap this up and figure out what's next." So I think that's one way. I think one thing we can do is like really intentionally practice it with each other. I don't know if that's really an answer to your question, because it's not the same as there's a jump there between virtually connecting starts with 30 seconds of silence and before we hit go live.
I think it's a great. I think that would be a great thing if we could get people to do it. I think it's a matter of getting people to do it. And I think it really hits the nail on the head, though, because what I'm saying is kind of what I said last week, right? Last week I said, when I go to a meditation retreat and I'm surrounded with 50 people and that's all they're doing, right? And we have a very strict schedule. This is, we're going to eat, we're going to have a break, we're going to meditate, we're going to have a break, we're going to meditate some more, we're going to break and have some food, and then we're going to walk around a little bit, have a little bit of break, then we're going to meditate some more. It's kind of, this is the way the schedule works at one of these things, It's easy to keep up with it, but when you're, just like in your life, it becomes more difficult. And I think there's a lot to be said for the community around you doing it, it just being a part of the day. So yeah, I think that would be one way to do it. I wonder how we could do it in other ways even,
Yeah.
I almost wonder if, we could tweet a pair, occasionally, remember, take a couple moments.
Well, if we do, you could do something like the writing workshop model, the online writing workshop model that says we just kind of check in at the beginning of the week and we say, here's where I want to get. Here's where I actually got. Here's,
right.
If I didn't get where I was going, here's what I did instead.
Mm-hmm.
With the understanding that what you'll get back is, wow, you had a lot on your plate this week. It's good that you even got 5 pages of writing done. Good for you.
Right.
We could do something like that. I actually find myself, I'm on Fitocracy. I'm very motivated by getting points every time I do anything physical, and that's for other people who are motivated that way. I guess what I should do is get on edX and say, we should have a group over here, to do to have, just to continue checking in.
Yeah, one of the things I think I struggle with too is that I'm not competitively motivated in any way. I can be extrinsically motivated in terms of meeting goals for myself, but it's almost like I just shut down if it's like I'm trying to keep up with someone else or something.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because that's not how I take it. I take it as very much just an extrinsic measurement of my own activity. It's more, for me, it's more quantified self than competitive.
Right.
But I could easily see how.
But for a lot of people, it is competitive. Like, it might not be for you, but for some people, it really is. And I think if it is more quantified self, if it's like me really just trying to get a certain number or something like that, then there's a little bit more motivation coming from something like that. But I know some people who are really, and sometimes it's built into the systems, right?
Yes.
So I went to a spin class once, and when I say system, I don't even necessarily mean technological system, right? It's just built into the authority structure of whatever it is that you're in. So I went to this spin class one time. It was one of these ones that was in this stadium, and they've done the lights, and they've got these crazy lights going on, and they've got things up on displays, and it was all fine and good until the instructor made it into this big competitive thing. It started off with the right side of the room in competition with the left side of the room. And then he turned it into a competition between men and women, which I had a lot of problems with because of just the physical differences between men and women. But what if I didn't identify as either man or woman? Then I'd be left out completely, So sometimes it's not even under your control. It's just that there's so much of fitness. There's this fitness industry, and so much of it is driven on competition. And it's a hard thing for me because I find myself in these situations where that's just not appealing to me at all, and I just shut down.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that. And you're making me reflect that this is a system that has levels. And, my levels are more a function of the fact that I have been going to the gym every other week for a long time, than any. If you actually looked at what I'm logging as accomplishments, they look exactly like what I was able to do 2 years ago. Maybe a little less, but yeah, I think that's just one example of, boy, Joe's got a lot of points. No, Joe's been here a long time. But I think you're still right that the question of when this ends, how do we keep a structure in place? Because obviously just having a Fitocracy account is not making me do yoga multiple times a week. So there's the social motivator is stronger. One of the interesting things, actually, I guess you sounded like you were going to follow up on that.
Go ahead. No, keep going.
So this is kind of a switch, but one of the things that I noticed is that the exercises are talking about reviewing your goals, reviewing your daily steps to your goals, and I didn't set it. And that's obviously connected to the fact that I'm not particularly pursuing this, that it's a nice to have, not something I was willing to even write down, here's where I'd like to be in 6 weeks. But it led me to a thought. How many courses have you taken that started with, what's your goal?
Right.
You know, what do you want to get? I can literally think of one time. And even that time, it was, the way it was framed was more, what would you like to know about this topic? And an awful lot of them were rather, they were either much bigger than the space allowed in the course, or really kind of the small thing that the professor could say, nah, that's not what happened.
I'm wondering if that is a Matt Crossland dual layer MOOC artifact that you're feeling there. Because I'm thinking about back to human MOOC. I feel like there was like, you know, how much time do you want to spend in this course? What do you want to do with this course? And that's the design that he's been going for, is like this mixture between the X MOOC and the C MOOC, right? Trying to have, but they also want to measure it. So I think that's the part of the, you know, well, hey, you know, if you want to break out and just kind of do stuff on your own, what do you think you're going to do? And then I think they ask those questions on the back end. Did you really do those things?
Right. But it struck me as an interesting thing, just from the critical, how does this thing work as a course, as a learning experience?
Right.
I just found myself really interested in that question of, why do we not ask people what their goals are? As opposed to
most of the time it's because we don't care what their goals are.
Yeah.
We have a goal for them, and we want them to meet our goal.
Yeah. Well, and to a certain extent, I mean, you know, I will have a better understanding of calculus is a bad goal for Yoga MOOC.
Yeah.
or even, you know, I will review the scientific literature on yoga and health. I'm not convinced is a great goal for the learning activities that they've set up, and that's not wrong. It's just where we are. So, you know, there's some level on which you have to say this course has boundaries, or it's not a course. It's just a bunch of people talking.
Right.
We're not talking, but yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of point at, to ask the question, what would a course look like if we started it? It's a little like, I forget who asked, but it was at roughly the beginning of this semester, somebody was pointing out, why do we do course design before we measure the existing knowledge of the learners? And I think this is a similar, why do we do course design before we measure the interest of the learners?
Well, all right, I'll play devil's advocate a little bit. In most cases, there's no way that we would know that. Right? We haven't met the learners yet. And so we have to start somewhere.
Right.
We have to start with something. I think the problem might be that that's not how we think of course design most of the time, right? Most of the time we think of course design as much more structured, much more not, this is our starting place. And when we meet the learners, then we'll start adjusting even more, because that's going to be the biggest influence that's going to impact things once we actually get in there, right? We think, or some of us maybe think that we design the course and then the learners will come. We will give them the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
They'll give us back the knowledge. We'll know that they have it because they gave it back to us, and then we'll give them their, their A or their B or whatever, and they'll go on.
Yeah. So I guess the one thing that I challenge is that it does seem to me that we've got enough lead time to ask these questions in an awful lot of educational environments.
Yeah.
And you're right. We have to have a topic. We have to have boundaries around that topic. We have to be able to communicate something about this is an advanced class versus this is a beginner's class. And yet I noticed that one thing that we get asked, I've had multiple faculty members ask me about how can I get a module together where I can tell students you're responsible for having this kind of knowledge before we start. Mm-hmm. So, it occurs to me that in particular in the collegiate setting where we've always got at least a couple of weeks between a semester stopping and a semester starting. There's an opportunity to try and get at that. And I guess that goes to the mindfulness and distraction question. Is that what we're supposed to be doing with our intercession breaks?
Right? No, that's a really good point, because the other thing that I was going to say is, especially in the digital age, right? Like I'm a huge advocate for digital citizenship and digital identity, and trying to, especially in a university structure, be at a place where students are crafting a digital identity for themselves. And maybe if we had that, it wouldn't be such a surprise who our students are, because we could interact with their digital identities before they ever come to class, right? If each one of my students had a blog, if each one of my students were doing sessions like these, if maybe I'd bumped into them from doing sessions like these with other classes, right? Like maybe I would know who they are, especially in a small college setting. Both of you and I are in small college settings, right?
Right.
So you're right. I was playing devil's advocate, and like even while I was saying that, I was like, this is kind of a cop-out. But then the question really does become, especially in this particular session and especially in Yoga MOOC, how do we balance that? How do we get away from screen time and get back to we can't just be knowing each other all of the time. And spending all this time in front of screens getting to know each other, like we also have to remember that mindfulness as well.
Yeah.
And would that just make the problem worse?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the flip side of it is that it would be a very reasonable reaction for somebody to say, no, intercession is when I focus on other things. I focus on my research during work time, and I focus on my home and family and friends who I have to cut out when it's schoolwork and grading time.
Right.
And that would be it would be a legitimate answer, but I'd love for more people to be interacting with that question.
Yeah.
What is most worthwhile for me and the way that I want to teach and learn.
Yes. And the thing is, like the way that I'd envision it, it wouldn't have to necessarily happen during intercession, right? It could happen even during the course. If like you and I were both teaching courses, maybe they're not even in the same discipline, right?
Right.
But the university has a structure in which, students are maybe in the first year asked to grapple with the idea of a digital identity, craft a digital identity of some kind, even if, you know, if there is something going on and they don't want it to be their legal name or whatever, there's still something there, right? And if there's some bleed over between our two classes, right, where they happen to see each other, where they happen to sort of bump into each other, and not in a creepy way that's like tracked or like, you know, not in some kind of way that feels like there has to be a way to develop some type of safety in there as well, right? Mm-hmm. I think there could be something to that, but I think that there are issues in terms of safety, in terms of providing a place where it's not this creepy tracking that's happening, but it's also not. It's also healthy.
Right.
And maybe that's the type of situation where we would also have to talk about how do we talk about yoga? How do we talk about mindfulness? How do we talk about these things in class? How do we talk about these things at an institution level?
Right. Yeah, well, and you know, so this is a conversation we've had multiple times in my institution, where it's the how can we get the students to go to bed? You know, not even do something, not even be active, just be sleeping.
Yeah.
But to be attentive about their own well-being, broadly. And the only solution that I really feel like has had any traction is a little bit of reminding students, particularly at the end of the semester, that cramming is not actually good for your learning, and you'd be better off to get an extra hour of sleep. But I think it does run rather smack into that creepy treehouse zone of I don't really want to have this conversation with my English professor.
Right.
And there has to be a mechanism that allows it to be safe in that way. That says, no, our relationship is not gym buddies.
Right.
I know multiple people who don't use our campus gym for exactly that reason, that they don't want, and actually, interestingly, specifically, they don't swim because they don't want to be in a bathing suit around their students.
Oh, right.
Which again, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
It's just where some people are, and we need to find a way to allow the people who want to engage the question to do so in a way that doesn't force anybody to have a weird relationship.
And this also might come back to some of our concerns, and actually haven't, and maybe it's because I haven't been participating, but I've actually thought it's been okay. One of the things that was a concern to me when Yoga MOOC started was, is yoga too intimate of a topic to be talking about in the open?
You know, that is very much why I think I've written 2 blog posts and not even opened a discussion board. And I don't perceive that I'm going to change that. And actually, it's something that I was a little unhappy with the week 3 readings, which get into a lot of Eastern and Western modes of thought, which I find it's a big globe.
I'm sorry, you broke up. What did you say?
So there's a lot of discussion in week 3 in the readings and lectures about Eastern versus Western epistemologies.
Okay.
And China and India alone are really big places. Indonesia is a really big place. The sphere that we call the East. It worries me to see that. And I think they did their best. I think they got where they wanted to go with it. But I think that when you get into these different different epistemological systems and different beliefs about the nature of reality, different beliefs about spirituality, I think it does very quickly get to a zone where, personally, I don't want to have that conversation with strangers on a discussion board. I'm not entirely sure I want to write it on my blog or talk about it while we're recording. I don't know.
Yeah, I was concerned about that. And I think we've done a pretty good job, at least in these conversations, being able to talk about that, but not talk about that. You know what I mean? To talk about it at like a meta level rather than actually get into it. Yeah.
And well, and that's the benefit of doing this in very small groups, where we can kind of map out, here's what I would talk about, here's what I talk about with Autumn, here's what I talk about on camera.
Right.
Here's where I'm ready to have that conversation on this day.
Right. And there's a lot of benefit, I think, to just even thinking about that. But it does sort of make me wonder, how do we do this in community? How do we do this? If I'm finding that that's what I need, right? I need community to sustain this. How do you do that in community when it's so intimate and it's so personal?
Right. I don't know. Maybe the answer is to encourage kind of small groups that are just vaguely aware of one another's existence. I'm trying to think about the problem of too many small groups that kind of splinter and then each individually crack up. There's some need to keep a broader community going, maybe. But yeah, I find myself thinking that a lot of this may come down to, I don't know. I guess I got into this wondering how yoga on the internet works, and I guess that's still a question.
It's funny that you mentioned swimming. That's the one everybody jokes about, right? Like, I took an online swimming class. Right?
I have not heard that.
You haven't heard that? I think it's a like Big Bang Theory joke. Yeah, I think Sheldon says, I know how to swim. I took that swimming class, and one of the other characters is like, but it was an online class.
Well, and I guess that's the downside of the, and I really appreciate the fact that they've made this a take what you want, adjust things as you need to adjust them to get where you're going. Again, I think the week 3 readings are interesting in that they cover a lot of ground about research on yoga and meditation. And what they find are that lots of different practices have measurable benefits. Kind of we know things happen biologically, even at the end of one session. And then kind of building it out to people who do multiple sessions a week or one session a week for a long period of time, and different results start to appear. And I think the message we're supposed to take from that is go the way that works, because something good will happen for you.
Yeah.
But there was a point to that, and it's just gone. It blew away.
Well, I think it is a good point, and I have noticed that. I think it's a good point just within itself, because I have noticed that in the recordings. I mean, even just Catherine saying that, when you're sitting in meditation, like, if you're really uncomfortable, adjust. It's right. It's not about holding some perfect posture. But at the same time, trying to let yourself be a little bit uncomfortable and really examining what that feels like. Examine what it feels like to sit there in this uncomfortableness. I remember when I was a young meditator, I struggled with this, and I sat in uncomfortable positions for a really long time sometimes, and it is, it's interesting to just watch yourself and think about what's uncomfortable, why it's uncomfortable. You know, I remember I went to the meditation teacher a couple of times and said, I'm worried because my leg's going to sleep, you know, and I'd come to him with a bunch of these, you know, little things. And finally, he just looked at me and he said, you know, I think you're addicted to worry, because you've come to me with all of these different things. You're worried about your leg falling asleep. You're worried about this itch. You're worried about this. You're worried about that. And it really kind of made me realize it wasn't worry was my problem. My problem was worry. It wasn't the, you know, that was my biggest distraction.
That's a really neat insight, though.
Yeah, it was. It was a really neat insight.
Because I probably don't sit with that enough, that there's, you know, that I am, and part of it is I've internalized the mechanism, the answer that if what's going on right now is this position is uncomfortable, or I have an itch on my nose, I'm gonna reach up and scratch my nose. But that does mean, and I never thought of it, that is a choice, a choice not to sit with that experience.
Right.
Which may be the logical and right choice, but it is one. It's not just it's not like the goal of meditation is to not be itchy. Right.
Well, and that gets back to the specific type of meditation that I studied, was all about experiencing the moment. And if your leg's asleep, then you experience what that's like. You know, and we never sit for like more than an hour, for instance. So, I mean, you have to put certain limitations on those kind of things, because, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to, you know, I mean, then you'd just be like really kind of torturing yourself, right?
Right.
You were, you know, if you were doing it longer than that, but yeah. Well, we've been at this for, gosh, what, 40 minutes now?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate having a community to slack through this course with.
I appreciate it as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I think that sounds like a stopping point, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. And we'll see.
Namaste.
Namaste.